Hello. Hopefully I'm getting the right live stream this time. The last time it was showing up on the Waking Up live stream because it had a duplicate stream key. And it looks like it's working. Yeah, last week I had issues with the audio. There might still be issues with the audio. If the audio isn't sounding very good, let me know in the chat. And hi, Paul. I saw you sent a message in the chat for the first time I was trying to go live for the week. This one's the Waking Up one, and the other one was it's rediscovering human divinity or something like that. So hopefully there wasn't too much confusion about that, and you can find where I'm live streaming from now. Hi Heather, it's me, Paul. You sound good. Awesome. Great. Wow, yeah, so it's been a couple of weeks, and just needed a break, and then the next week, it just was not working at all. The streaming software was not picking up any audio, and I was trying to fix it, and it was just not working. And when I opened the same software up this week, it worked fine. It's so weird how it just works out like that. Anyways, so great to see you here, Paul. And I'm sure there's so much that has been going on in your life, as it has been for all of us. Like in our daily lives, we have this kind of normalcy, these daily things that are going on, but underneath the surface, there's so much that is happening, so much that is working out for us in our favor, even though it doesn't always seem like that beautiful life that we want, like just yet. Things are changing, things are happening. And so that's a reason to be excited, to be optimistic and positive about what's happening. Throughout January, I felt a lot of this really heavy energy, like waking up and being like, ugh, like this reality again, like I don't really want to be here and deal with this. But it's not just, the environment, it's the energy, because we feel that energy quite strongly when we are tuned into it. And sometimes you can't help but automatically be connected to it. It's just showing up in your body, it's showing up within you, and you're living through it. So that good thing is that we can change the energy. Like that is something that we work through, and it can shift quite quickly. So I'm feeling better, feeling less of that heaviness, but just yesterday I was feeling really deep sadness. I'm like, why am I feeling so depressed? I worked through it, felt better. Yeah, it's been crazy. Yeah, oh, I'd like to know like what's going on with you and what you're experiencing, Paul, because you're someone who's really tuned in and tapped into, what's going on within your own spiritual journey. I've been feeling a lot of that heaviness still, in terms of negativity, and I find myself showing up with those negative thoughts that are there, right? And I'm having to remind myself, oh yeah, like let's not talk like that. Let's focus on what we want and the positive aspect, of our lives. And I've been talking about the awakening process, and ascension and what's going on with that, and talking about a lot of this hope for the future. And there's the other side to it. Like, what if things don't change? What if stuff doesn't happen, right? What if I'm having all this hope and then nothing changes? And there's almost like this fear of like, you imagine you're risking or losing something if you have faith, if you imagine beautiful, positive things going on in your life. And I think the truth of that is just, there's stuff in you that kind of has to work out the kinks. It has to open the flow, open the channel where you can be that creator in your reality, and your desire and what you want to manifest is able to flow through you in an unobstructed way. And so, kinks are being worked out. Things are coming into fruition. There's things underneath the surface, and even things that are kind of obvious. So, we're still in it. We're still in this process of change, and we are the instigator of this change as we create, this new reality, as we are embracing, who we really are and discovering what's possible. The world is going to open up for us slowly, gently. And I was listening to someone talking about our container for happiness, our container for the things we want in our life. It was Mina Irfan on the Universe Guru channel, and she was talking about how we have this certain capacity for happiness, and it's kind of contrasted with like this struggle and these challenges in our lives. So, sometimes what happens is, instead of opening ourselves up to create more for ourselves in our lives, what we actually do is create a problem, create struggle, and then resolve that struggle, and then you get like that little burst or injection of happiness, or like seemingly better. So you're like going up and down the happiness scale to get that hit, instead of consistently working on yourself and expanding your container or your capacity. And that made a lot of sense to me, because it's like weightlifting. If you're going to be consistently putting in the effort every day, you're not going to see the effects of what you're doing, but over the long run, you're going to have better results than if you put in solid work for a little while and then started ego lifting. If you're constantly doing that, you would get less results in the long run. So sometimes you don't see the results of what you're doing immediately or obviously. In my conscious life, I'm positive, in a good mood. My negative blocks are in the subconscious, and I'm working on cognitive reframing. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Paul, for sharing. So that is so important, because there's that recognition of what you can control consciously, but also seeing how, stuff is working itself out. And that's okay. And stuff is coming up. And, it's just that subtle refocus, where you refocus on positive, you reframe it to say, like, you know what, this is good, this is great that I'm feeling this way. I was feeling that today, feeling grumpy, not feeling so great. But what do? You show up anyways, and you see what happens. Awesome. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of waking up. And I gotta make sure that we're on the right one here. There we go. Okay, so we're talking about waking up. And this has the element of, wanted to talk about, the different meanings of this, and how can we reconcile our ideas around this. That's funny, because the guru I'm learning from, Grandmaster Siddha Akshar, always talks about clearing and then preparing the container. You are the container. Awesome. So cool. I had a little bit of synchronicity there. The ideas about the container. This idea of the container, I think, wasn't always clear to me, but I suppose it's like another way to see it is your capacity. The more work you've done on yourself, that clearing the subconscious blocks, the more capacity you have to create beautiful things in your life without sabotaging yourself. And I was thinking about that this week, about how many negative thoughts still show up in my mind and how I perpetuate those negative thoughts in those scenarios. And I thought about it, maybe I'm just clearing this through. I'm working through this in my mind, in my psyche, realizing, you know what? This is not such a bad thing if this happened, and that's okay, and I can work through it. And I have the skills to deal with it. So it'd be okay, and I can release this and let go of whatever fear is showing up here for me. And I was thinking about how, like, when you clear everything, then it's so much easier to have positive thoughts, to not have this anxiety or worry or creating all these mental pictures in your mind of things that could go wrong, because the channel's clear. You can just imagine beautiful things in your life. Like, there isn't that same struggle or obsession with problems. So I'm so glad you're here tonight, Paul, on this discussion, because I'm sure you have some interesting things to add and a unique perspective to give to this conversation on waking up. So we can talk about waking up in terms of enlightenment, enhanced states of love and bliss. Like, there are different, I've heard it described as different mountain peaks, and you can experience these different states of enlightenment on these different mountain peaks. And a really strong state of love, awakening to love, that's one of those peaks. I've heard it described as experiencing reality as holographic. Detachment from the mind and ego. Waking up can also mean spiritual awakening. Also, the awareness of reality being different than what is collectively socially agreed upon. So in all these definitions, that would probably be an underlying theme. Deconstructing social conditioning and seeing through like this veil of political and economic manipulation. So there's different meanings for this. I've heard people talk about enlightenment, and I thought, I don't think they're talking about what I've heard or what I thought it meant. And there's different levels of waking up that you can experience in your life. Like, you can keep learning more and keep having new revelations. Consciousness itself is infinite, so it's ever expanding. So it's really not a place that you get to when we talk about enlightenment, but it's really this journey. So I'm going to use slides to discuss like how other people have talked about this topic, and then add some of my own opinion on their perspective. Waking up is continuous. Yeah, it is. And it's so funny because like the idea of being enlightened, like, am I enlightened yet? It's like, well, that's a thought in itself. And then who cares about being enlightened? So I'm going to reference first Leo Gura. He has a channel, actualize.org. It's also a website. And Aaron Doughty has mentioned that he's listened to a lot of Leo Gura's work as well. It's very interesting. It integrates a lot of concepts and his own study and his own personal work. So I see Leo Gura's work as a perspective, not the whole of entirety of everything that you experience condensed into one paradigm or perspective or description, but it's like a guidepost. This is an aspect of reality that you can experience. And I think some of this is really important of what he says, because it doesn't matter how you are waking up, a lot of this still applies. So he's talking about enlightenment being a profound truth that isn't well known. And it's fundamental to your happiness and emotional well-being. It's nuanced and delicate and requires extraordinary open-mindedness, self-honesty, and commitment. Now it's obscured, yet it's right in front of you. And he describes the process of waking up or developing enlightenment as something that can cause you emotional distress, anger, depression, confusion. Now we know this is common to feel confusion when you are detaching from paradigms, really detaching from ego. You can call it detaching from 3D consciousness. There is this disorientation that happens. Because, that was the reality that you're familiar with, and now you're connecting to a new reality. The anger and depression that comes up, a lot of that can be this emotional debris that's kind of being stuck. It's stuck to the paradigm, and as you detach from the paradigm, then that can be released too. But of course, as soon as you start to detach, that comes up, and it comes up and to be released. So that aligns with a lot of emotional work. He's saying, it's difficult to communicate because there are blind spots in the way we communicate and think. And of course, if you're aligning with your soul, and we talked about this in the spiritual gifts, if you are receiving higher level information, then it doesn't come in through language, through logic, and it comes in through these higher forms. Through light, it comes in through this almost encoded information, but you're going to a higher level. Because there are limitations to logic and rationality. The conventional paradigm of reality is based on assumptions that aren't necessarily true. So he's describing this as a process of discovering the truth of reality through your own senses and consciousness. Now the tricky part is how do you interpret this? A lot of how we perceive reality is filtered through interpretation. The text under the title, Spiritual Enlightenment, the Most Shocking Truth You'll Ever Hear, that's the name of the video that I'm referencing here, and it'll be as a link in the chat, in the description. I'll link it in the description. So what's required is releasing the tendency to believe what the mind says. The mind plays games with you. This was such a good reminder because I've watched this video a while ago, and I went for a walk after I wrote the slides, and I was thinking about how the mind has been playing tricks on me and how I've been attaching to ideas and concepts within the mind and, believing these different stories. Instead of releasing them, realizing, they're just stories. So discovering the truth of enlightenment, it unravels the psyche. And the psyche has its own self-protection mechanisms that provide resistance from this. So another term that we use for this is ego death. So the ego death, it can happen all at once, it can be a slow process. But it is this quite shocking experience where it can feel like you are dying, even though the body isn't dying, which is interesting, because that already shows you that you don't necessarily believe at the core of who you are is the body. So looking at that thought, that perception of who you really are. And at a cursory glance, you might feel some identification with the body, but through an ego death, you'll start to realize that how that attachment, it is falling away. Yeah, so through this process, you have the dissolution of familiar models. So you start to realize that your thoughts about reality aren't necessarily true. Are the thoughts that other people have about reality true? Are the stories that you've been told, are they true? Like, what about reality is true? I'm still detached, and yes, have been going through a lot of emotional work and tuning into synchronicities, angel numbers, and lots of wild animals, spirit animals. I'm still learning how to interpret. Very cool. The synchronicities and angel numbers is interesting because I usually never get them, but not this week, but a couple of weeks ago, I was seeing the repeated numbers when I don't normally do it. So that was interesting. We've talked about connecting with your higher self and the importance of that. So yes, it's really important to connect to your higher self, to look within yourself. And then there is also the question of, well, what information do I trust? Whether it's outside you or within you, there is that learning process of getting familiar with how do I interpret this. Thank you so much for sharing, Paul. I know personally I've been going through a lot over the last year of releasing, these conditioned ideas. And it's painful. It's so hard. There's a lot of emotion that is attached to that. Fear of, being lonely. For example, the whole idea of getting married, having kids, this whole model, right? That is a societal construct. You can have a strong desire for connection, for partnership, for kids, but, that attachment, what if I can't have that? Then I'm going to feel like you're going to be isolated and alone and excluded from society. So there's that whole attachment to that conditioning and that idea of that you really need that. So that was painful. And a lot of the romantic attachments to the idea of romance, the idea of this true love and having a soulmate. There's so many attachments within this, and I've had to let go of a lot of that and have been working through that as well. So that's been really strong for me, like that's shown up for me so strongly, and it's been quite painful. I think though, it's leading to something really, really beautiful. We're doing so much work, and we've done so much work, and there's going to be results that come out of that. Trust your intuition. Yeah, and this is a process, learning how to trust your intuition. You're navigating the maze, you're figuring it out. Yeah, so fear arises when mental models and assumptions are challenged. So I think, like, we're already seeing in society a lot of truth coming to light. There's people who are being held accountable for the things they've done, and I'm starting to see on social media these things are coming out. Are they the truth? Are they from reputable channels and sources of information? I don't know. But I do know that a lot of this, it's coming out because, these things need to come to light. Justice needs to be served. And we need to develop collectively an awareness of what's going on behind the curtain, and light to come to all the darkness that's being hidden. Everything that's happening in the dark, that's been obscured in the dark, light is coming to it. Just like we are bringing light to all the shadow parts of ourselves, all the parts of ourselves we don't want to look at it, like the painful parts, this fragmented parts of us where, we develop these subconscious beliefs that we're not good enough, that we need to live in poverty, we need to struggle to survive, like all of these things that we adopt as beliefs because they help us survive in the situation, in the reality that we've been living. As we bring light to this, bring love, detach from, this kind of addiction to suffering that can happen. I just want to stay here. This has helped me survive so far, so I'm just going to stick to it and keep doing it. And there's this fear of releasing that. I resonate with that subject as well. Marriage, soulmates, twin flame. Yeah. I think there is this positive and beautiful aspect to marriage, soulmates, and even twin flames, despite the bad rap that twin flames are getting, especially lately. So there is, that toxic element that we are purging. And as we purge more and more of it, we connect to the beauty within ourselves, and that's reflected, in the different facets and aspects that shows up around us. Everything is being illuminated. A lot of us have a subconscious sense of unworthiness. Absolutely. And it's so prevalent, and it's like so strong. It's just, it's been wired in there so strongly. Like, oh my gosh, I don't think, that the society we're living in is normal. It's not how it should be, not how it was intended to be. And as conscious beings, as conscious humans that have that divine spark within us, I don't think any of us, would want to create a world where there's, the level of injustice and pain and hurt that happens. And a lot of that happens because of this fragmentation that happens where people are not connected to their souls. They're not fully conscious. They're not able to self-reflect. And so much of that is there. And how do you get to that state? You get to that by a really deep level of trauma. Like we know there's been so much trauma that has happened that creates this kind of world that we live in. This is what I'm going to be talking about. Like these are the series of the next, this one and the next two ones. It really covers a bigger area. I'm going to try and not be too long, but for me, a lot of what we're talking about is really interconnected. There's the dark side of it, but there's also the light. So I wanted to address the dark side of it, which is going to be coming up in the next 2 months. But as we see and recognize that, we also see the light and the beauty that is emerging from that. Because, you know, if we've been suppressed and held down and really blocked from an awareness of our capacity of who we really are, we see that and we're like, you know what, we're not allowing that anymore. We're going to really step into our power and, you know, who we really were originally designed to be. Then like the path opens up for us. Definitely interconnected, the dark and the light. Waking up from not fully being aware. Okay, so I forget if I already went over this slide, but we talked about that fear arising when your mental models and assumptions are challenged. And this is really about seeing who you really are instead of defaulting to a mental paradigm. Now, Leo Gura talks about how to get to enlightenment, you really have to put in like the thousands of hours of focused work. I'm not concerned about being enlightened, but rather what we're talking about here, applying it to our lives, what works for you. And start there. The psyche sabotages and manipulates any effort to discover the truth. And it's important to pay attention to your emotional reactions when you're confronted by information that you're not familiar with. So notice what you aren't. And this comes up too when you're like trying to focus, trying to meditate, and you're getting distracted. You're meditating and you're uncomfortable. And I've noticed that I like to stretch and, you know, work out like all that tension in my body. And I'll want to distract myself by listening to podcasts, listening to videos. And what I want to work on is just doing it in silence, not getting distracted, being fully present with what's here. Because all you need to do, if you want this to happen, is really just disconnect yourself from social media, from distractions, from all this extra stuff. And it'll happen naturally. So he has an exercise that he does in the video where you just be present, close your eyes, and notice the thoughts and the thinking, and then noticing the awareness behind the thoughts and the feelings, feeling into what you are. Your thoughts, feelings, your body, and trying to pinpoint exactly what you are, like where it is. Pinpoint what is experiencing reality. And he says, what you experience as you is an illusion. You don't exist. And he said, like, you need to experience it, not just believe it, because then it becomes a belief. And he has the exercise of looking at your hand. And there is no entity seeing or experiencing looking at your hand. You think you are the body, the mind, the thoughts experiencing this reality. But that illusion of personal self is an illusion, and your notion of ownership over your thoughts, body, and experience is an illusion. You experience perceiving objects, but you as a perceiver doesn't exist. Perception itself exists without a perceiver. Staying on the breath, not having any thought. Presence, exactly, feeling, not thinking. So you don't even need to think too much about it, about whether you're a perceiver or not. You can just be present. It doesn't have to be something super complicated. You are what's looking. Yeah, thank you, Paul. And he says, you are a thought, not a physical entity. The false self is what or who you currently believe you are. It's a thought telling you who you are. Who you are can't be communicated easily through language. The distinction between sensations and hard physical matter doesn't exist. So that's another layer. Matter itself is a conceptualization. It's a field of awareness. So Neville Goddard talks about your reality as you project it outwards. The field of awareness that reality consists of is non-localized. It's not you perceiving that field of awareness localized within yourself. That's a thought. Every part of reality is self-aware. Life is impersonal and neutral. Your thoughts about you are impersonal. All thoughts and beliefs are just stories about reality, not reality itself. You're not the body, so you're immortal. Detaching from the body releases that fear of death. So what we're talking about here, like, it's difficult to even like fit into the paradigm of even what we've been talking about in previous live streams. Like, what is this? Is this the idea of you are God? And it's so interesting that you can directly experience this. Is there a need even to categorize this and stick it into your paradigm of reality? And so that brings us to, paradigms of reality. They're useful, they're helpful. But in the end, these paradigms, they're not the truth directly. It's so tricky, it's so mind-bending. But then again, why does the mind need to understand it? As soon as you get the mind trying to understand, you're already out of it. You're already gone on a distraction. And it's like you get too mentally wound up in it, and it, like, the puzzle just becomes infinitely more complex. And it's that the tricky part where, like, the harder you try, the harder it is. Okay, we'll move on. So free will doesn't exist. The perception of control over your thoughts and body doesn't exist. Wow, this is very tricky, right? If we want to talk about free will. It's all done without any input from you. The thoughts you experience make it seem like you have control. They edit your perception of reality to deceive you. So the body takes action, and then there is this thought that says, you did that. Now, what can you do about this? Like, all you do is just focus and pay attention to the awareness that is experiencing. That's all. That's all there is. This is pointing to getting more in tune with that awareness. Not a justification for causing hurt and pain, because apparently there's no free will. So this is really, really tricky. Like, you can argue all you want and have these paradigms of where you're like arguing for free will and against free will, all of this doesn't matter. Like, it matters to the degree that it helps. A story loop. You are what's looking. Story loops, yeah. So, the biggest thing that you can take away from this is that to the degree of what is being described through language is helpful for you, embrace that. Because, like, we're talking through language, right? Like, we're explaining the unexplainable. But, you know, even just getting ready for this live, it was a really good reminder for me. Because, like, we're playing within the story, we're existing within the story. You know, we're making up these stories. So, you know, you want to detach from the stories, but, like, you can still enjoy the story. And hopefully by detaching, you can enjoy it even more. Like, do we understand and really know what life is and reality is? And that's, you know, that's the discovery. But it's a discovery through awareness. And so it becomes more beautiful, more interesting, more subtle, more nuanced. The moment we stop looking through the paradigms of the mind, through logic and rationality, through the accepted paradigms, and we start to become more aware. We start to embrace and consider different ideas, different thoughts, different paradigms. You know, if you're locked into certain paradigms, it prevents you from embracing new paradigms. So we're going to talk about that more. I have more examples later on. So this is very interesting to me. Positive language, not negative inner dialogue. I just saw 555. Did you? Oh, it is. It is 555. That's right. 555. This is a really, really interesting because my experience when I was diagnosed with severe clinical depression, like, I was very, very low. I was sleeping like once every 3 days for about 6 hours. It was not good. Like, I had difficulty existing. It was very challenging. I had a very rigid hold onto what I thought was true and real and what I needed to do and what life needed to look like. In that low point, I abandoned my ideas of truth and embraced, you know what? What's true and what's relevant is what works for me. If it makes me feel better, if it makes me want to live, continue to put in the effort to change what's going on in my life, I'll just do that. Because you know what? Right now, that's what matters. I've had it too, severe clinical depression. I think it changes your understanding of reality. And it really forces you to let go of what's not working and, like, really embrace what does work, because you have to. Like, you are forced and pushed into a situation where you have to embrace what works. And, you know, if it's not working, you're going to have to shift some paradigms. You're going to have to let go of some things. So the perception of control over your thoughts and body doesn't exist. No, what do you take with that? You know, one thing you can take away from that is just, like, release shame and release blame. If you're not conscious and aware, you're gonna be operating according to kind of like the machine instructions that your operating system, like your body, like your neural pathways, that your genetics, that your societal conditioning conditions you to do. So it's happening. You know what creates free will? Awareness ironically creates free will. The greater awareness you have, the greater degree of free will you have, because there's an ability for a choice. So I know I'm contradicting myself because like the slide just said there's no free will, but you have to remember that the person presenting the ideas that in this video that I have on the slide here, Leo Gura, they are presenting something to help people to commit themselves to bettering themselves and to growing themselves. So, is it the whole story? I don't think so. Is this valuable? Yes. Yes, that's exactly it. What I'm doing, letting go of all that's not working for me and doing everything that is good for me by taking back my power from the external. Yeah. Yeah, so it's so interesting that, even if free will is an illusion, if it's a helpful illusion, then we're like, yeah, because you have to go from being a victim to having agency over your life. And then, you master that and you can start to move into the space beyond that. Because, what we're talking about here, if you're experiencing an enlightened state, you're going into the operating system of reality. It's like, opening up a computer and seeing what's behind there and maybe changing it. Like, you're getting down into the roots of it. So, there's the life that we experience and people just go through their day experiencing, but you can connect to the deeper levels of what exists. Okay, perception of control of your thoughts and body doesn't exist. It's all done without any input from you. The thoughts you experience make it seem like you have control. They edit your perception of reality to deceive you. Realizing this releases suffering and distress. Yeah, there's been times where I've been driving to work and being anxious about feeling like a bad person because I'm late. And I'm like, I don't want to be in this experience because I feel bad. And I've tried to release attachment to the I that is judging myself for like being a bad person. Right? This can be helpful if you think about it this way. And it's like, you know what? It's not about becoming enlightened or the end goal. You know what it is about? It's about the struggle in the moment. About you fully experiencing and feeling into what is happening right in that moment. And a lot of that has to do with being comfortable with like, a bigger range of experience, of emotions, of being able to open yourself up to greater sensitivity to feeling. So you can feel the highs, you can feel the lows. And any enlightened person that ever existed, they still feel. They still experience. And, even if they get Lyme's disease, it's not fun. It's still, pain is still pain. But you can perceive it differently. All the problems in your life are fake. Your life is an escape from your true nature. Your psyche must embody this lie to exist. So there's another layer, is, each enlightenment experience that you have, there's more. But when you have an experience, it seems like this is the final destination. But there's always more. And that's the interesting thing about talking about becoming awake, becoming enlightened, because it's not about the final destination. Instead of running away from the feelings, exactly, yeah. Your psyche must embody the lie of not being able to see who you truly are and perceive reality accurately to exist. So religion, philosophy, etc. are stories. And you can have momentary experiences of enlightenment as well as a permanent experience of it. Yeah, so you can only be enlightened when the psyche dissolves, or like when this ego dissolves. Just experiencing raw reality without separation from it. Okay, so that's interesting. We've got this idea of separation. So we've been talking about like unity consciousness and separation consciousness, 3D and 5D, and how, we've got this polarity and like non-duality. So, there's this unity, like you're finally integrated. You are nothing and everything. And I can hear the mind saying like nothing and everything, like what is that? And trying to understand it. Believing it prevents you from experiencing it and discovering it through your own perception. So if you are fully immersed in what you're doing in your life, you're not even thinking about this, right? This is it. I really enjoy playing piano because it helps me to be immersed in the moment. And yes, this takes focus, and you're tired, and sometimes you want distractions. Reality is exactly what it appears to be without any additions of you to it. We have to subtract you from it for you to see it. So seeing your attachment to stories. So like there's so much depth, right? It's not unusual to spend your whole life working on this. I do think that in the current time, this is a lot more available to us. I think it's easier now. You are unlimited. The ego is limited. So you can have subtle distractions to take you away from this truth. And yeah, this is one of the things that I want to work on, being uncomfortable, being in silence. And when I'm just alone by myself, I do sometimes feel that discomfort, and I want to distract myself from it. Like it doesn't feel great. But there's value in letting myself fully feel that. Right, the stories about if I just have the right person in the right house, right? We all know how that goes. Yeah, so this voice in our head applies random labels to things and random logic to connect things. And we've got these layers of webs of concepts. And we assume all these stories are true. Every story has another story behind it that tells you that it's true. And you're creating these self-fulfilling prophecies. All right, one thing I wanted to mention. So there's a channel that talks about non-duality called Simply Wide Awake, I think. If you look up double barrel non-duality, you'll probably find some of their videos. One thing, I was watching an interview that they were doing, and they were talking about, this experience of becoming awake or enlightened, and how, there's still people who might not look enlightened from their definition of it, but who embody this deep level of love. So that's why I'm saying, it's not about the end goal of becoming enlightened, because, you can become enlightened, you can detach from the mind, whatever, but without that love, without that connection to your divine self, it's still kind of an empty experience. And that's why, you listen to different people and you think it through yourself. And you're like, what do I really want? And of course, in this discussion, we talk about the I, and it doesn't make sense to like use I, but it's a convention, right? Like language, it's like these symbols. It's almost like nonsense, right? Like what does it mean? But we still rely on it quite a lot. And maybe we're moving into a time where we're not going to rely on language, like we're going to move more telepathically. We're going to be able to sense things outside of language. Enlightenment continues. It's not an end state. Yeah. Yeah, so I've got more slides on this. So we've got these cleverly hidden, vicious, logical circles. So stripping away all the thoughts and the stories and the falsehood in your consciousness and awareness creates all the suffering and drama in your life. Your mind projects stories onto images that it sees. You've got these false assumptions creating imaginary problems. Now, even if you strip away a little bit, it'll actually have quite a big effect. Society is rampant with groupthink, conditioning, cultural influence, delusions of the masses. We know how people are just kind of like plugged in. But the interesting thing is like there is a lessening of people's ability to be distracted. Like they can't like live with themselves anymore. So that's a big thing. There's all these changes that are happening. This video that I'm referencing here was made 10 years ago. And the fact that like we could have had a video like that on YouTube, like readily available like that, is incredible. I personally think because, being able to access that kind of information, it wasn't readily available the way it is now. Of course, you have to be interested in it and look it out, but still. Society is a playground of distractions, and the psyche is designed to avoid its blind spots. We've got the political system, educational systems, corporate system, religions, and they're all just distracting from this truth. Yeah, the religions distort truth to the point of losing touch with reality, trying to communicate, this underlying truth that can't be communicated. So he's talking about ego death, and like a lot of the times we think, there's this part of us that's the ego that we need to kill off, but then there's still an I. But he's saying, you know what? No, ego death is like releasing that I, raising your consciousness until you see that the self doesn't exist. And a lot of this self, it's this preoccupation with this idea of who you are, of protecting that idea of who you are. So, it's becoming free from like needing to protect yourself, needing to protect this image of who you are, of what other people think you are. So he's talking about the benefits, gaining true peace of mind regardless of circumstance, no longer needing to chase happiness. The illusion of gaining happiness needs you to constantly chase it. We know that. Emotional mastery, like we've been working on emotional mastery like crazy, right? Like the ability to feel, resolving self-image problems, resolving suffering. So this is really the selling points, and we can see a really strong, Zen Buddhist tradition being shown here, like being sold here. And when I went to church and was still strongly adhering to the Christian paradigm, I was in church one day and listening to, instead of the regular sermon, they had missionaries who were funded by their church come and talk. And they were talking about how they set up this juice factory and they were doing their missions work, and there was a monastery nearby. And they were like, oh, I wanted to convert these people to Christianity. And I was thinking, you know what, like, why are you so close-minded? Why do you need to convert them to Christianity? I think that they have something that you could learn from them. And if you are actually willing to learn from them, that's more of an open channel of communication. But they weren't willing to learn. They're very stuck in their ways. Very stuck in their paradigms of like, what's true? It's because of your frequency. It's how you attract the information that you couldn't perceive because you are tuned into something else. Absolutely. As you tune into higher vibrational frequency, new info is... I'm going to have to wait for the next part. It looks like you're still not finished that thought. Absolutely. Yeah, I noticed that. And it's interesting because like I'm starting to see new information that I didn't see before. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Is available. Okay. Okay, so we have like this paradigm or perspective of enlightenment, of waking up. What I think we're really describing here is a state or experience of reality. Okay, so now we're going to shift over to not this state or experience of reality, but we're going to talk about another kind of waking up where it's revealing, you know, releasing this attachment to dogma, to these certain paradigms in our society that people hold so tightly to, and there's such a strong attachment to. I mentioned I was going to reference videos from the channel called The Fifth Kind, and we see Paul Willis on that channel a lot, and he has different guests. So I'm assuming that's his channel. He has another channel just called Paul Willis. A lot of the same kind of content. So this is really interesting because we talked about like going down to like the base level structure of reality and experiencing that directly, and now we're talking about paradigms. But a lot of the things I talked about before are still applying here. This open-mindedness, this revealing of new information that I think is so revolutionary. We're talking about Christianity, but Christianity has such a stronghold within the subconscious psyche with how people relate to God. How people relate and understand, you know, the spiritual awareness. Now, you know, being in the church can be beautiful. I enjoy, you know, that just connection with God, and people are just like putting their hearts out there. It can be a beautiful experience. There's the negative part of it, which is like all the dogma, and you know, the parts of it that don't make sense. I didn't intend for it to be this long. There's some more slides here. Hopefully it's not going to take too long here. But this is really, it is a really big topic. But I got excited learning about this because like as I was listening to the video, like I could feel beliefs within me like deconstructing. I was like, oh my gosh, because like I spent a lot of time within the Christian church and I definitely gained things from it, but there is this idea about reality that may not be true. because we look at the Bible and there's a lot of it that we say, okay, we're just gonna like gloss over that. Like, okay, it's like people weren't very smart. They like had these like kind of ideas about reality, and that we're gonna spiritualize all of this. So I'm gonna put the link in the description again for this video. It's called "The Bible is Not About God. Are They Still Controlling Us?" So we have, it's this 4-hour documentary with Mauro Biglino and Paul Willis on the Fifth Kind channel. Paul Willis was a pastor for 30 years, a theological educator, and then he studied ancient mythologies. Now it's kind of taboo to like study other mythologies in the Christian church, but I think he probably got so deep into it that he was like, you know what? There's something going on here. Mauro Biglino is an Italian guy, translated a biblical text for Hebrew scholars. He is a Hebrew scholar, developed the interlinear Bibles. Now, like, interlinear Bibles are tricky because, yeah, they show you the word, but then they have this kind of stock translation. So how would we know? We wouldn't know this information if we didn't have people like this telling us this. So this is shocking to the Christian world. It's shocking to the Christian paradigm. And a lot of the information in this video was, you have to be open to seeing reality as different than what you thought it was. I've detached quite a bit, so I'm like, oh, this is so interesting, and having things that I studied that like, wow, this makes sense, because like there was, I don't have it here with me, but there's a specific passage that is in my Bible that I was like, what? Why is this? Why does it say this? Like, how can you say this? Like, this is awful. I'm not gonna try and get it right now because like don't want to be too long, but I'm gonna talk about it in the slides. I was raised Catholic, baptized, and confirmed, but I didn't find God through that religion. I'm very well read with the Bible and have read all the traditions texts for most of the main religions. Yeah, you're very well read, so like that gives you a really holistic understanding. I'm fascinated with the esoteric meanings behind the traditions. Yeah, it's cool. So the meaning we derive from ancient texts depends on translation, editing, and paradigms we apply to what those words mean. And it makes a big difference. Academia requires more accuracy in translation than household Bibles. So this was a major point that Mauro Biglino was pointing out. So there's this meaning that is obscured by church dogma. The initial meaning could be very different than current understanding. And there's a distinction between the God described in the New Testament and the Old Testament that they talked about. The God that Jesus describes is loving, and the Old Testament God is violent. And this was the issue where it was talking about like, it's okay to have ethnic cleansing because God said so. I was like, you know, we have like Israel, Palestine, like that whole thing, you know. I'm not gonna talk about that, but I was like, this is still an issue. There's a difficulty in reconciling the different descriptions of God if you assume they are the same between the Old Testament and the New Testament. One of the words in the Old Testament translated into God is Elohim. The word God translated from Elohim describes a God that is cruel, enforces absolute obedience, and demands his people to commit genocide, which is the ethnic cleansing that I was talking about. You shalt not have any other gods before me. You got to worship God with all your heart and mind and being. Actually, that might have been, I'm a bit rusty, that might have been from the New Testament, but there's a distinction in the language used. Results in justification for religious authorities to exert control and dominance over people. How convenient. Used to justify violent religious wars, robs people of their inherent connection to God or source, creates a distorted perception of God, obscures our history and understanding of who we are. So I didn't even have an awareness of it at the time, but I started to realize, how long ago was this? This was maybe 8 years ago, maybe a bit later, that I had an issue with the word God. Like, what does that mean? And I realized, like, no one in the church actually knows what this means. And now I'm seeing, like, wow, the word God, it has these really, really deep layers of meanings within the collective consciousness. And a lot of it is not that great. And so, like, we can understand, the reluctance of people to use that word to describe what they're talking about. And I was very offended by the word God for quite a while. I'm okay with it now, but... And it's so interesting, like, you can pick up on that on a subconscious level and not really fully understand. See, the big thing being realized is God, is not outside of you. It's not separate, it's in you and must be awakened. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and this is really the issue with what is described in the Old Testament. And even, the way that we interpret the New Testament. Right? Like, there is this ideological goal behind it. So, the Bible describes many different entities that are all translated to a singular word, God. There is parallels with different mythologies around the world within the Old Testament if we are careful about the translation. Elohim means powerful ones. Not one God, but many individuals. Not spiritual deities, but physical beings. And like, we're already going into dangerous territory here. So, what they're saying, what the Old Testament describes, is colonies of humans governed by powerful ones. Humans being sent out to war against each other on behalf of the powerful ones. There are descriptions of high-tech technology that previous generations of translators couldn't conceive of. For example, the word ruach. I've been to Bible studies where we're like, ruach is the spirit of God, it's the breath. And Paul Willis says, actually, it might also mean the rush of air from, like, a spacecraft. And, the weird descriptions in the Bible, he's like, you know what? That could describe, like, a UFO. And it's like, that actually makes more sense than what we thought the Bible was describing. Because, translators, they're like, what is this? I don't know what this is. And so they did their best. Maybe they just didn't have a concept. It's possible that what was described was something that, the original person writing was just describing what they're experiencing. The later translators, they're like, what was this? And they're trying to put it into their own words. Literally, allegorically, symbolically. I've compared the same paragraph in all the different biblical translations, and there is not one Paragraph translated the same. Yeah. So the text was originally translated to adhere to an accepted ideology. The text translated to support ideological values instead of being open-minded enough to see what it actually describes. And it required the translators to ignore grammatical rules. So they made up rules about how we're just going to ignore the grammar to make this fit what we think it means. There's been a lot removed. Yeah, they were selective about what they decided to keep in there. The Hebrew language had no word for God. We understand the word God as an omniscient, omnipresent, transcendent spiritual entity that is to be worshipped. So those are Paul Wallace's words or description. There's a lot removed and hidden. Yeah. And it's so taboo to these extra books, you're not supposed to read them, right, in the church. Elohim is also translated as judges, legislators, governors, the bright ones from above. These indicate functions that the Elohim performed. The Bible presents a very different story. It's more concrete, more understandable, and more fascinating when we start to take the grammar seriously and look at what these subtleties in the original text, in the original language, Hebrew. What does that mean? When you have this open-mindedness, where you're I'm not trying to fit this information into a preconceived conception or paradigm. Elohim describes the diversity of beings which make up the sky council that preside over humanity. Why do the Elohim stories describe events where humans get brutally slaughtered to further the conflict between the individual Elohim? It's very similar to those of ancient Sumeria, Babylonia, Arcadia, and Assyria. I don't think I said that right, but... So I'm trying to summarize very quickly, but if you want to, the link will be in the description. You go back and watch the video in full. So Elohim translated in different places as angels, false gods, judges, and demons, right, depending on the context. There is competition between Yahweh and the other Elohim. The Elohim are in competition with one another. So if you think about the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not worship other gods, right? Maybe we don't want to be worshiping these entities and instead connect to the divinity within ourselves. But what was the original intention of this commandment? This being, Yahweh, wanted that power and that control. Don't mention the other gods, don't depict them, because what we have here is a story of these, not gods, but really powerful beings. And when we say powerful, what we really mean is these awakened capabilities, which is available to us, right? We've talked about how awakening, this is involved in discovering our spiritual gifts. Only worship Yahweh, right? That's what that 10 Commandment was about. So in Genesis we see them talking about, let us make man to look like one of us. So that's really the literal translation when you're looking at the grammar of the Elohim, which is plural. And so that was presenting a grammatical problem if you want to adhere to this ideology. If we look at and translate it literally, it presents a philosophical problem. And this was the issue there. In Genesis 3, we see Elohim arguing about how intelligent human beings should be. Because we're starting to see the story here where, human beings are used to further these beings' agendas. So, the more intelligent beings we are, the harder we are to control and exploit. So this references and is corroborated by the Mesopotamian story of Enlil and Enki. We're going to talk a little bit more about the words used. Elyon, which means the Most High. We've got El, Elyon, and Yahweh, corresponding to different individuals. And Morrow was saying he identified more than 20 Elohim, different individuals present in the Old Testament. Elohim can mean a plural of majesty. So we're saying it is referencing to these different beings, not to a single entity, but it references to majesty, sovereignty, excellence, intensity. I'm not sure what intensity means in this case, but. And then Elyon observes and guides the Elohim. So Elyon is singular. So in Deuteronomy 32:8, we've got where Elyon, and this Elyon is translated into God if you have an English Bible. Elyon divided the people and defined the boundaries of the nations based on the number of children of the Elohim. And then, so Morrow was, I'm not sure if it was Morrow or Paul who was talking at this point, but they're distinguishing between the God defined as Paul, where God is defined as the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being. So that definition, corresponds to what we're talking about in the earlier video, where you are discovering you as this awareness. Because the Bible was misunderstood so much by people, Jesus channeled himself through a woman named Helen Schumann and kind of rewrote the Bible through her. It's called A Course in Miracles. Cool. I know it sounds crazy, but when you read it, you can tell that the wisdom is from a higher intelligence. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Irvina. Yeah, it's so interesting because, you have access to, that divine inspiration, and yet people are so immersed in dogma, so immersed in this control-based paradigm that they're not willing to accept it, they're not willing to listen. Yeah. I didn't know that about the Course in Miracles, so thank you for sharing. So the final redaction of the Hebrew scriptures was done for ideological reasons, to teach monotheism, endorse the Jerusalem temple, justify the Davidic monarchy, Levitical priesthood, and the authority of the high priestly family, to centralize power. And if you're familiar with the New Testament, you recognize where, Jesus was not happy with some of the stuff that was going on, and recognize, a lot of it was empty and was about power and control. Because you've got this being that's like, worship me. It's like, I'm all about power and control. What do you think the structures are going to be that follow that? So this completely changes my perspective of a lot of the Old Testament, and all these people that Yahweh chose to represent him, and it's like, what kind of people are they? Yeah, it changes a lot. Because, you've got someone or an entity or being that likes power and control. Who are they going to choose to represent them? And it puts, who was it? Solomon in a different light? Because, Solomon had temples dedicated to the other gods, or these other powerful ones, and you know, in the Old Testament, they're giving him flack for that. They're like, oh, and it's because of his foreign wives that he did that. And it's like, you know, you start to see with a different paradigm and like these different things about right and wrong, it becomes relative. Like you can rewrite history in a different narrative with a different perspective. So like this is so interesting to me. Yeah, so there was a lot of pressure to get rid of the temples and shrines of Asherah, who was another powerful being, wiping out the memory of other powerful beings and only worshiping Yahweh. Obscured information in earlier forms of the stories. And they mentioned how, you know, Jesus would not associate him with the term Yahweh. It's like, nope. So that's an important distinction. Like God the Father, that's not Yahweh. Okay, so, you know, this theme is present in other myths of advanced beings with seniority over humanity. And this is like, it's wild when the myths are truer than the stories about reality that's true. And it's like, oh, you're crazy if you like believe that those myths could be true. Like, this is so like mind-bending again. I love Proverbs. It's the part that's undiluted. Yeah. I know, I like to read the Psalms and Proverbs too. Yeah, you know, if you are gaining benefit, again, from reading your Bible and you can extract value from it, like I know, Paul, like you are someone you can extract value from things, like you have that skill, then it's beneficial and it's helpful for you, right? I know, you know, being Christian has helped a lot of people. Yeah, so these other myths that reflect the same themes, the Edo narrative from Nigeria and southern Benin, they have the mighty one above the waters, Osanu Bua, the Tagalog of the Philippines, the epic story of Nigeria with Abasi and Itai. So in Genesis, we've got the story of the flooded waters, where the Ruach arrives over the flooded waters. So there's this being that's over the waters. I had no idea that these stories all reflected each other. So like that was really interesting for me to learn that. Okay. So this is really where I'm going to stop for today. We've been going on long enough. And we've really kind of only scratched, you know, the surface of this topic. But like the point I wanted to talk about was really like waking up. It can mean different things. It can be like going down to like that awareness, like that existential awareness, to waking up to, you know, not everything that we've been told is true. There are some, you know, there's another person, Gigi Young, who talks about this, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's like these cycles of ascension and then descension, where, you know, like God is descending into matter to individuate and then ascending out of matter as individuated beings to experience reality. And it's this like circular loop, and time is circular. So I was like, oh, that makes sense. And I think, you know, that aspect of it is probably missing from what we saw earlier in like the becoming enlightened, right? You know, you've got a small snapshot, but then what about the bigger story? And you've got these people who are tuning into their higher selves and getting all this different information, which tells about a bigger story. So I just have a slide here that I'm not going to go into and talk a lot about. This is Honey C. Golden. So she has this whole story right? Like, these are stories, right? So we don't need to start wars over them because they're stories. But she has like all this information that she's tuned into herself. She says like she went through this ego death, and then that opened up all this psychic information. So all this about, you know, the earth being different than what we've been told, and, you know, like how there has been a lot of like ET involvement, and a lot of that has been hidden. And there's lots of different beings that exist, and we've just really been kept in the dark, and we've been controlled, we've been used and subjected to really awful things. And a lot of this is, you know, relating back to the dimensions, like third dimension, fourth dimension, fifth dimension. So a lot of this is, you know, she describes it as God experiencing itself and learning through positive, through negative, through, and of course, like, a lot of it's been really unpleasant. But through this ascension process, we are seeing through the dark. We're seeing who we truly are as sparks of source, of divine light, of divine beings. And we are changing the reality that we're in. And we're opening our eyes to seeing a bigger reality. So, you know, it's so interesting because we, like, talked about earlier, you know, like, matter isn't real, like, it's projected, and it's like, you know, that actually fits quite well with there being like different dimensions. You have like lower dimensions are denser, and then higher dimensions, you know, they have less of that physicality. So like all of these, you know, different people talking about these different paradigms, they're really interesting because they give us this bigger picture. So I was thinking I might do another video on what Honey C. Golden is talking about and the whole paradigm there. It's super interesting. I think the interesting part about it is it provides like a explanation or mechanism where the original design that we have is not having to strive and struggle and work to survive, but being able to live in abundance where everyone is abundance. And the reason that we haven't been is because of this desire to have power, to have control. But that's, and using lies to keep us disconnected from our true abilities. So I think that's interesting, that if it helps you to have faith and believe that you can really have the life that you want to have, and especially in this time because lots of interesting things are happening, lots of changes are happening, if that helps you, awesome. If it doesn't help you, again, don't worry about it. Because like there's the aspect where we're all experiencing like kind of these parallel realities, and they're kind of interacting with each other. So it's this almost kaleidoscope of experience. So, you know, when people talk about stuff, not all of it's going to apply to you is basically what I'm saying. Okay. The key is finding your unique truth. Everyone has one. Yeah. There's a documentary called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and how the UFOs travel is instant and through frequency, and really cool. Awesome. I guess that's why the channel is called The Fifth Kind. That's what it's referencing. I didn't know that that's what it was referencing. Okay, so. Yeah, so Honey C. Golden talks a lot about UFOs, and how, you know, through her higher self, she's received downloads about how our reality is going to change a lot. So I referenced some of that in the New Year's video. But yeah, you know, it's possible. And whether, whatever happens, I believe that, good things are coming, and we're going to experience some really cool things. But we can release attachment to like needing any specific certain thing to happen, because we don't have control over that. The fifth kind means we contact them. Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, that. Yeah, you gotta have an open mind to be really open to having those kind of encounters. Contact them through the psyche. And I guess what you're meaning is like through I can't think of the word right now. What's it called? Like telepathic, or but people have described encounters where it was very much a physical thing too. Okay. I didn't realize that was going to be that much material to get through. Tried to get through it as quickly as I could. You've got to watch it, yeah. Close. Okay. I will watch that. Yeah, there's so much information out there, and I personally, some of it's quite negative, and it's like, it's good to know about it, but for me it matters a lot about how it's portrayed. It has to be calm and not like fear-inducing. I don't like the videos that are like that, because it's like, you know what? We don't need to be trapped in this whole fear thing. Because, it's possible that a lot of the stuff, like the reason we're having this new level of disclosure about, what could possibly, how our reality could be different than how it's portrayed, and people are being allowed to actually speak on things, is because on higher dimensions, like the war has already been won. So like there's these different levels and planes of what you can call spiritual warfare. Things have to work out through all the different layers and levels. So I don't think there's a need to be overly fearful. I think that we can find peace and have confidence that it's okay, like it's being taken care of, and we are doing the job that we need to do. Awesome job, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. So you guys have a wonderful weekend, and yeah, take time to be present and enjoy the moment, and yeah, be open to what's unfolding. Awesome. So I'll be back next week, and I'll see you then. Bye.